The afternoon sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The streets were not too busy, just a few cars passing by, some people walking with shopping bags, and the distant hum of city life carrying on as usual. For most drivers, it was an ordinary day. But for one woman, everything was about to take a very different turn. Jordan sat upright in her seat, her hands steady on the steering wheel as she drove home. She wasn't in a rush. The day had been long, but she managed to get everything done with her usual focus. Driving had always been a small space of peace for her. She liked the rhythm of the road, the red lights, the turns, the way the tires rolled smoothly against the asphalt. It gave her a chance to think, to clear her mind, and to prepare for whatever awaited her tomorrow. Up ahead, a stoplight turned yellow, then red. Jordan slowed her car gently, waiting at the intersection. She noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. Its engine was running, the faint sound of the motor blending into the background. She didn't think much of it at first. Seeing police cars was nothing unusual in the city. But after the light turned green and she continued driving, the cruiser pulled out slowly and merged behind her. At first, she assumed it was a coincidence. Police cars went everywhere patrolling neighborhoods, responding to calls. But when the cruiser stayed close, shadowing her every move, Jordan felt a quiet unease creep in. She checked her rearview mirror. The officer inside was watching closely. The car's headlights seemed to press against her own vehicle, even though it wasn't dark yet. She straightened her posture, not because she had done anything wrong, but because something told her she was about to be stopped. And she was right. A sudden flash of red and blue lights filled her mirror. The siren gave a quick, sharp burst. Jordan's heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the weight of the situation. She signaled, pulled over to the side of the road, and eased her car to a stop. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting calmly at the top of the wheel. She took a slow breath, centering herself. This wasn't the first time she had been stopped while driving, and she knew how important it was to remain composed. The officer's door opened with a heavy click. From her mirror, she could see him adjusting his belt as he walked toward her car. His pace was measured, deliberate. He carried himself with a kind of confidence that said he believed he was in control before the conversation even began. Jordan lowered her window halfway. The warm air of the afternoon drifted in, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby yard. The officer leaned down slightly, his sunglasses reflecting her calm expression. "License and registration," he said flatly. Jordan reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, moving with steady, deliberate care. She retrieved her license and pulled the small folder with her registration from the glove compartment. Handing them over, she looked at him politely and asked, "Is there a reason I was stopped?" The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her license, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You seem to have an attitude," he finally said. Jordan blinked, surprised by the comment. Her tone had been neutral, her expression calm. She hadn't raised her voice or even frowned. Yet here he was, assigning a reason that had nothing to do with traffic laws or road safety. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied evenly. "I just asked why I was being pulled over." The officer straightened up, resting one hand on his belt. He gave a small shrug as if to suggest he didn't need a concrete reason. "Sometimes it's not about what you did," he said, almost casually. "It's about how you come across." Jordan stayed quiet, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. She felt the urge to challenge him further, to point out that such reasoning had no place in a traffic stop. But years of experience had taught her the value of patience. She knew when to speak and when silence spoke louder. Instead, she rested her hands back on the wheel, looking ahead at the quiet street. A couple of cars passed by, slowing briefly as their drivers glanced curiously at the scene. To them, it might have seemed like any other routine stop. But inside the car, the atmosphere was heavy with tension that no outsider could fully see. The officer lingered at her window, waiting for a reaction that never came. Jordan's calm demeanor seemed to unsettle him more than if she had argued. She didn't fit the script he was used to. Most people would grow nervous, apologetic, or defensive. But she remained composed, steady, and quietly questioning without raising her voice. He cleared his throat. "Sit tight," he muttered, stepping back toward his cruiser. Jordan watched him go, her mind working carefully. She wasn't angry, not yet. Instead, she felt a deep curiosity building inside her. Why had he chosen her? Why that excuse? Why now? The minutes ticked by slowly as she waited in her car. The hum of passing traffic continued, and a bird perched on a nearby telephone wire sang a short melody, unaware of the tension below. Jordan kept her breathing slow, her eyes forward. In that moment, she wasn't just a woman pulled over on the side of the road. She was an observer watching, studying, remembering every detail. The officer thought he was in control, but he had no idea who he had stopped. He didn't know that the woman in front of him was not just any driver. For now, Jordan allowed the scene to unfold naturally. She would give him the space to show himself, to reveal his true approach. Every word, every gesture, every careless assumption, it would all matter later. As the officer sat in his cruiser, running her information through his computer, Jordan rested her elbow lightly on the edge of the window. The setting sun cast a warm glow on her dashboard, making the moment feel strangely calm despite the tension. To anyone else, it might have looked like a small inconvenience, a few wasted minutes on the side of the road. But to Jordan, this was the beginning of something much larger. She could sense it. She could feel it. The officer remained in his cruiser longer than expected. Jordan could see him through her mirror, typing something on the small computer mounted inside the car. His shoulders shifted as he leaned forward, then back again. Every few seconds, he glanced toward her vehicle as if trying to read her even from a distance. Jordan stayed still. Her patience was steady, though her mind was always alert. She had learned long ago that moments like this often revealed more about people than words ever could. The silence, the waiting, it was part of the unspoken test of control. Finally, the officer opened his door and stepped out again. The sound of his shoes striking the pavement was clear in the quiet street. This time, he walked with slower steps, his chin slightly raised, and his posture signaling that he was in charge. At least, that's what he wanted it to show. He reached her window and leaned down just a little closer than before. "You know," he began, his voice carrying a tone of authority, "when an officer pulls you over, it's best not to come across with attitude. It makes things harder for everyone." Jordan's eyes met his. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. "I understand," she replied softly. "But I still would like to know the reason for the stop." Her words were polite, almost gentle, but they carried a firmness he couldn't ignore. There was no trembling, no hesitation. She wasn't apologizing, and she wasn't defensive. She was simply asking for the clarity that any driver had the right to expect. The officer shifted slightly, as if her composure caught him off guard. "Like I said," he continued, "it's about how you present yourself. When I approached your car, I could sense you weren't exactly respectful. That's something I notice." Jordan tilted her head slightly, considering his words. She wasn't angry, more curious, more observant. "I spoke clearly," she said, her tone even. "I gave you my license and registration without delay. I didn't raise my voice. What part seemed disrespectful to you?" For a moment, his mouth opened, but no immediate answer came. He wasn't used to being questioned so directly yet so calmly. His usual rhythm of control was slipping. Most people in this situation might apologize quickly, eager to end the stop. But Jordan was different. She wasn't playing into his unspoken rules. The pause stretched. Then, with a quick shrug, he shifted the conversation. "Where are you headed this evening?" Jordan gave a simple answer. "Home." "From work?" he pressed. "Yes." "What do you do?" His tone carried a subtle edge, like he expected her to hesitate. But Jordan didn't. She smiled politely, though she kept her answer vague. "Office work," she said smoothly. "It keeps me busy." He studied her, as if trying to read between the lines. The silence between each question grew heavier, but Jordan's calmness remained unshaken. She wasn't going to give him more than what was necessary. She wasn't going to hand him the reaction he seemed to be fishing for. The officer leaned slightly on the window frame. "See, here's the thing," he said, lowering his voice just a little. "When people cooperate fully, these stops go quickly. But when I sense attitude, I have to be more thorough. That's how it works." Jordan held his gaze, her expression neutral but steady. "I understand you have a job to do," she said. "And I've cooperated. You have my documents, and I've answered your questions." Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. They reminded him, without direct challenge, that she had fulfilled every legal requirement. Anything beyond that was his choice, not her obligation. For a moment, the officer seemed unsettled. He stood up straighter, adjusting his belt again. He looked down the street, then back at her. His confidence wavered slightly, though he tried to cover it with a practiced air of authority. "You know," he finally said, "drivers like you make my job complicated. A little respect goes a long way." Jordan didn't argue. Instead, she simply nodded, her face calm. "Respect should go both ways," she said quietly. The words were soft, but they landed with more strength than a raised voice ever could. The officer froze briefly, then let out a small chuckle as if to brush it off. But in that chuckle, there was a flicker of something else, something uncertain. He tapped her license lightly against his palm. "Sit tight," he repeated, turning back toward his cruiser. As he walked away, Jordan exhaled slowly, her eyes following his retreating figure through the mirror. She wasn't shaken, she was thoughtful. Every interaction, every line of questioning, every unnecessary pause, it was all part of the bigger picture she was quietly piecing together. Inside the cruiser, the officer sat for several more minutes, occasionally glancing at her car. Jordan noticed the way he seemed restless, shifting in his seat. His earlier confidence appeared to dim with each passing second. Perhaps he was reconsidering his words. Perhaps he was simply searching for something he couldn't quite find. Jordan leaned back against her seat, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She knew patience was a powerful tool. People often revealed more when given silence than when pushed with questions. And right now, silence was on her side. As the minutes passed, her thoughts wandered briefly to the countless times she had witnessed moments like this, situations where authority leaned heavily on presence rather than fairness. She had learned to recognize the patterns, the tones, the subtle hints of power being exercised not for safety, but for control. Yet she also knew the importance of balance. She wasn't here to confront recklessly. She wasn't here to prove a point in anger. She was here to watch, to listen, and to let the truth show itself naturally. Finally, the officer emerged once again from his cruiser. His stride was slower now, his expression more measured. He held her license and registration in his hand, but he didn't immediately return them. Instead, he lingered by her window, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You've got a clean record," he said at last. "No tickets, no issues." Jordan nodded once. "That's correct." He looked at her again, searching for something in her eyes, maybe compliance, maybe submission, maybe even guilt. But all he found was calm clarity. "All right," he said finally, handing her documents back. "I'll let you go this time. Just remember what I said about attitude. It matters." Jordan accepted her papers with a polite nod. "Thank you, officer." He lingered a moment longer, as though waiting for something more, then turned and walked back toward his cruiser. Jordan placed her license and registration back in their spots, her movements steady. She didn't rush to start the car. Instead, she sat for a brief moment, her eyes focused ahead on the open road. She knew this wasn't just a stop. It was a glimpse into a much deeper issue, one that stretched far beyond her own experience. The officer believed he was reminding her about attitude, but in truth, he had revealed something far more important, his own way of operating. And Jordan had taken note of every word. As she restarted her engine and pulled gently back onto the road, she felt the weight of the encounter settle in her thoughts. She wasn't angry, but she was resolute. Encounters like this were never just random. They were windows into patterns that needed to be seen, understood, and addressed. The road stretched out ahead, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. Jordan drove in silence for a few blocks after the stop, her thoughts steady but alert. To any passerby, she might have looked like just another commuter heading home after a long day. But behind her calm exterior, she was piecing together every detail from the encounter. The officer's words, his posture, the tone he had used, it all played back in her mind like a recording. And in truth, it was more than memory. Her dashboard camera, small and discreet, had captured the entire exchange. Every pause, every question, every claim of attitude was now documented in clear audio and video. Jordan's work demanded such measures. For most people, being pulled over was simply an inconvenience. For her, every encounter was potential evidence. And tonight, that evidence would carry weight. She had not yet revealed who she was. To the officer, she was simply another woman he had stopped on the road, one he believed he could lecture without consequence. But in reality, Jordan was much more. She was an FBI agent assigned to a delicate case, one that directly involved officers like him. And the irony of the moment was not lost on her. Later that week, Jordan returned to her office downtown. The building stood tall against the skyline, its windows reflecting the morning sun. Inside, the atmosphere was professional but steady, with the quiet hum of printers, the murmur of agents exchanging notes, and the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the air. She walked into her division's meeting room, carrying a slim folder and a small drive. Several colleagues were already seated, their eyes lifting as she entered. At the head of the table sat her supervisor, a man known for his sharp eye and calm leadership. Jordan took her seat, placing the folder neatly in front of her. "I have something new," she said, her voice measured. Her supervisor nodded for her to continue. She pressed the small drive into the table's console, and within moments, the screen at the front of the room flickered to life. The recording from her dashboard camera played, filling the room with the sounds of the roadside stop. The officer's voice rang out clearly, his comments about attitude, his shifting explanations, his pauses. The agents in the room listened closely, their faces steady but their eyes sharp. They weren't surprised, many had seen similar patterns before, but the clarity of the recording added undeniable weight. When the clip ended, silence lingered for a moment. Then her supervisor leaned forward, his hands folded. "That was him." Jordan nodded once. "Officer Daniels. Same name that's come up in at least 6 community complaints. Most of them were dismissed before reaching higher review." The supervisor exhaled slowly, thoughtful. "And he doesn't know who you are?" "No," Jordan replied. "He treated me as if I were just another driver. Which tells us his behavior is consistent. It wasn't about who I was, it was about how he operates." The other agents exchanged quiet glances. Some jotted down notes. Others tapped on their tablets, cross-referencing past reports. Jordan leaned back slightly, her gaze thoughtful but steady. The important thing, she continued, is that he revealed his approach without hesitation. He believed his reasoning was enough. That makes it easier to show the pattern, because it's his own words, not just assumptions. Her supervisor nodded. This strengthens the case. It shows that what's been reported isn't isolated, it's systemic. Jordan folded her hands on the table, her expression calm but resolute. She had been in this line of work long enough to know that cases like these were never simple. They required patience, careful documentation, and steady steps. But moments like the one she experienced, unexpected, unplanned, but deeply telling, were what often brought the truth into the light. Later that evening, as she drove home again, she thought back to the stop in greater detail. She remembered the officer's confident stride, the way he leaned on her window as if the space already belonged to him, the way he had spoken with certainty about attitude. And then she thought about the look in his eyes when she hadn't responded as he expected. There had been a flicker there, a brief pause when her calmness unsettled him. That flicker told her more than his words ever could. Jordan knew she couldn't reveal her identity in that moment on the roadside. It wasn't the time. It wasn't the place. But the day would come when Officer Daniels would see who she really was. And when that day came, he would realize that the stop he thought was ordinary had actually been the beginning of his own unraveling. The following week, Jordan found herself once again in the neighborhood where the stop had occurred. This time, she wasn't simply passing through. She was observing quietly, carefully how Officer Daniels carried out his shifts. She parked discreetly on a side street, watching as he pulled over another driver. Her notes filled quickly: the way he approached, the words he chose, the length of time he kept people waiting. Each interaction carried small clues. And though each driver might have seen their stop as routine, Jordan saw the thread connecting them all. When Daniels walked back to his cruiser after yet another stop, Jordan caught a glimpse of his expression. It was the same one she had seen before: confident, unchallenged, almost certain that he held all the power. But soon, that certainty would meet a truth he wasn't prepared for. Back at headquarters, the investigation team began aligning her evidence with past reports. Complaints from community members, dashcam footage, and internal notes started forming a picture that was difficult to ignore. And at the center of that picture stood Officer Daniels. For Jordan, it wasn't personal. It was never about one single encounter. It was about responsibility, fairness, and the trust that people should feel when they see the very individuals meant to protect them. Her own stop had been a piece of the puzzle, a piece that fit perfectly into a larger story already unfolding. In the quiet of her office one evening, Jordan reflected on the path ahead. She knew it would not be fast, and it would not be simple. Change rarely was. But she also knew that truth had a way of shining through, even when people tried to cover it. She thought back again to that moment on the roadside, the officer leaning in with his words about attitude. He had no idea that the person in the driver's seat wasn't just another civilian. He hadn't realized that the very person he tried to intimidate was the one investigating him. That was the reveal Jordan carried silently for now. She didn't need to flash her badge that day. She didn't need to confront him openly. The real power lay in patience, in evidence, in letting his own actions speak for him. The days passed quietly, but for Jordan, they were anything but ordinary. She continued her work with steady focus, collecting every detail that mattered. Reports, recordings, and observations slowly built into something solid. Each new piece fit into the puzzle, forming a clearer picture of how Officer Daniels operated. But the time was approaching when silence would no longer be enough. Evidence spoke, yes, but sometimes it had to be paired with presence, with a moment that reminded people they were not beyond accountability. That moment came one late afternoon. The sky was cloudy, heavy with the look of rain. Jordan was once again in the same neighborhood, reviewing her notes in her car. She had parked near a row of shops, blending in with the steady movement of pedestrians. From her spot, she could see Daniel's cruiser parked at the end of the block. Minutes later, the familiar flash of red and blue lights lit up as he pulled over another driver. Jordan's eyes sharpened. The routine was almost predictable now. The same posture, the same measured stride, the same tone of control. But today, Jordan wasn't here to simply watch. Today, she was here to step forward. She waited until Daniels finished speaking with the driver, who looked confused and nervous as they handed over their documents. Jordan could see the unease in the driver's hands as they rested on the wheel, waiting. Jordan opened her door and stepped out. She walked with calm confidence, her coat brushing lightly against her sides as she approached. Her pace was unhurried, yet each step carried purpose. She didn't rush, because she didn't need to. Daniels noticed her before she reached him. He frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward her. "Ma'am, this is a traffic stop," he said firmly. "You'll need to step back." Jordan's voice was steady, low but clear. "Yes, it is a traffic stop. And it's being observed." Her words were calm, not confrontational, yet they held a weight that made Daniels straighten instinctively. He studied her for a moment, perhaps sensing something in her tone that he couldn't quite place. "I don't need an audience," he replied, a hint of impatience in his voice. Jordan's eyes met his directly. "You've had an audience for longer than you realize," she said softly. Daniels hesitated, clearly unsettled by her words. His usual confidence didn't flow as easily this time. He turned back briefly to the driver, then back to Jordan. "Ma'am, I'm conducting business here. Please step back to your vehicle." Jordan reached slowly into her coat pocket, not quickly, not sharply, but with calm deliberation. She drew out a small leather case and flipped it open, revealing the badge inside. The silence that followed was heavier than any raised voice could have been. Daniel's eyes widened slightly as he leaned closer, reading the emblem, the name, the title. His mouth opened, then closed again, as though his practiced words had suddenly vanished. Jordan's expression remained steady. She didn't smile, and she didn't scowl. She simply let the truth sit between them. "I believe you recognize this," she said quietly. "And I believe you understand what it means." Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his earlier authority slipping. "You're with the Bureau?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost cautious. "Yes," Jordan replied simply. "And I've been assigned to review the complaints that have surrounded your work." The driver inside the stopped vehicle looked between them with wide eyes, unsure what was happening. Jordan glanced toward them briefly and gave a small nod, a silent reassurance that things were under control. Turning back to Daniels, she continued, her tone still calm but firm. "Every word you've spoken during these stops has been documented. Every decision you've made is being reviewed. And today, you chose to speak to me as though I were simply another driver to be handled. You didn't know who I was, but that is exactly why this moment matters." Daniel's jaw tightened. He tried to steady his voice. "I was just doing my job." Jordan's head tilted slightly. "Your job is to protect and to serve with fairness. But what I experienced was not fairness. What I observed here today was not fairness. And what others have reported matches what I've now seen myself." For the first time, Daniels looked uncertain. His usual confidence seemed to falter under the quiet strength of her words. He shifted his weight, his hand brushing against his belt as though seeking comfort in routine. But the routine no longer shielded him. Jordan stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. "I need you to understand something important. This isn't about one stop. It isn't about one driver. It's about a pattern. A pattern that is now undeniable." Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to her badge once more. "What happens now?" he asked, the words quieter, less certain. Jordan held his gaze. "Now, everything is reviewed officially. The recordings, the reports, the observations. You'll have the chance to respond, but the truth is already clear. The driver in the car shifted nervously, clearly aware that something unusual was unfolding. Jordan glanced toward them again and offered a polite nod. "You may go," she said gently. The driver hesitated, then started their engine and drove off, casting one last look through the mirror at the strange scene they were leaving behind. Now it was just Jordan and Daniels on the roadside, the cloudy sky above them and the sound of distant traffic filling the silence. Daniels tried once more to steady himself. "You should have told me who you were from the start," he said, his tone carrying a faint edge. Jordan shook her head slightly. "If I had, you wouldn't have shown your true approach. This way, there was no mask. Only your words and actions, as they naturally are." Her calmness was disarming, her clarity cutting through his practiced authority. Daniels looked away for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon as though searching for words. But none came easily. Jordan returned her badge to her pocket, her movements measured. "This will move forward through the proper channels," she said. "You'll hear from the Bureau soon. In the meantime, I suggest you reflect on how you conduct yourself. The badge you wear carries responsibility, not control. People look to you for safety, not intimidation." Her words were not harsh, but they carried undeniable weight. They were the kind of words that stayed long after the moment ended. Without waiting for a reply, Jordan turned and began walking back to her car. Each step was steady, her presence leaving behind an air of finality. Daniel stood by his cruiser, his expression unsettled, his thoughts no doubt racing faster than his heartbeat. As Jordan slid back into her seat and started her engine, she glanced once more at her mirror. Daniels was still standing there, watching, his posture no longer as sure as before. She drove away quietly, the rain beginning to fall in soft drops against her windshield. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, blurred by the mist. Inside her car, Jordan felt no triumph, only resolve. The confrontation had not been about embarrassment or revenge. It had been about truth, about clarity, about letting someone see that their actions had consequences. She knew the next steps would not be hers alone. The Bureau would handle the formal proceedings, the investigations, the reviews. But her role in this was clear, she had given the moment shape. She had stood in calm truth where others might have stayed silent. Rain fell gently across the city that night, leaving streets glistening beneath the glow of street lamps. Jordan drove home with the quiet rhythm of the raindrops tapping against her windshield. The confrontation was still fresh in her mind, not because she regretted it, but because she knew it marked the turning point. She had revealed who she was. The truth was out. And now, the process of accountability had begun. The next morning, Jordan walked into the Bureau building with her usual calm stride. Colleagues passed her in the hallway, nodding in greeting, some carrying files, others hurrying toward meetings. For Jordan, the day was not ordinary. She carried with her the evidence of what had happened, and more importantly, the confirmation that Officer Daniels' behavior had now been seen not just by the community, but by the very agency charged with oversight. She entered the conference room, where her supervisor and several agents were already waiting. The table was lined with folders, and the atmosphere was serious yet steady. Her supervisor looked up, meeting her eyes with a knowing expression. "You've done what we needed," he said. "The direct interaction, the evidence, it's all here now. The review board will move quickly." Jordan nodded, sliding her written report across the table. He revealed himself clearly. No force, no anger, just his own words. "And I believe the recordings, combined with the other reports, show a consistent pattern." The team listened as she walked them through the timeline, the first stop, his words about attitude, the way he handled the second driver, and the confrontation where she showed her badge. Each detail was supported with video, audio, and her observations. By the time she finished, The room was quiet. Everyone understood the weight of what they had just reviewed. "This isn't just about one officer," her supervisor finally said. "It's about the trust people have in the system. If one officer uses their position carelessly, it affects how the entire community sees the uniform. And that's something we cannot ignore." Jordan agreed silently. She knew well that trust was delicate. It could be built slowly over years, but broken in a single moment. And repairing it required honesty, responsibility, and action. In the weeks that followed, the review board launched a formal inquiry. Daniels was placed on temporary leave while the investigation unfolded. Internal files that had been quietly closed were reopened. Community members who had once felt unheard were invited to speak again, their voices now documented and respected. For many, it was the first time they felt their concerns mattered. Jordan sat in several of those sessions, listening carefully as people shared their experiences. Some spoke softly, unsure if their words would carry weight. Others spoke with relief, grateful that someone was finally taking them seriously. Jordan didn't interrupt. She didn't push. She simply listened, because listening was often the first and most important step in healing. And with every story, the case against Daniels grew stronger, not from exaggeration, but from consistency. Each account echoed the same themes: unnecessary lectures, vague accusations, and a feeling that respect was one-sided. Through it all, Jordan remained composed. She knew this wasn't about proving herself right, it was about letting the truth speak. Months passed, and the investigation reached its conclusion. Daniels appeared before the review board, where the evidence was presented. The recordings from Jordan's stops played, his own words filling the room. The board listened, not with judgment at first, but with responsibility. They compared his behavior to the standards expected of him, and the gap was impossible to deny. The outcome was clear: disciplinary measures were enforced, and Daniels was removed from his position. It was not done with anger or spectacle, it was simply the result of accountability. News of the decision spread quietly through the community. For some, it felt like a small victory. For others, it was a reminder that change, though often slow, was possible. Jordan didn't seek attention for her role. She went about her work as always, steady and professional. But those who knew understood the importance of what she had done. She had not raised her voice, she had not acted out of frustration, she had simply stood in truth, letting patience and evidence do the work. One evening, as she walked out of her office building, the air was cool and the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. A woman approached her cautiously, someone Jordan recognized from one of the community meetings. "Agent Jordan," the woman said softly, almost hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thank you. Not everyone would have listened. Not everyone would have cared. But you did." Jordan smiled gently. "Your voice mattered. It always mattered. Sometimes it just takes the right moment for people to finally hear it." The woman nodded, her eyes bright with quiet gratitude. Then she walked away, leaving Jordan with a sense of calm fulfillment. Driving home that night, Jordan reflected on everything that had happened. The roadside stop that began as something ordinary had turned into a defining moment. What had once been a simple encounter between a driver and an officer had grown into a story of accountability, fairness, and the reminder that no one is above responsibility. She thought of Daniels, not with anger, but with clarity. She wondered if he now understood the weight of his actions, if he had taken the chance to reflect on what went wrong. Perhaps he would. Perhaps he wouldn't. But either way, the truth had been shown, and that was what mattered most. For Jordan, it was never about bringing someone down. It was about lifting the standard higher, about ensuring that those who wore a badge did so with respect and fairness. She knew the work was far from over. There would always be more cases, more challenges, more moments that tested patience and resolve. But she also knew that one step at a time, change could happen. And sometimes, It started with something as small as a stop on a quiet street, where the balance of power shifted not through anger, but through calm truth. The rain had stopped by the time she reached her home. The air smelled fresh, the ground damp with the memory of the storm. Jordan parked her car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought of the community she served, the people who had spoken up, the voices that had finally been heard. She thought of the power of patience, the strength of calmness, and the importance of letting truth stand on its own. Then she smiled softly to herself, stepped out of the car, and walked inside. The story was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever believed their voice didn't matter, everyone who had ever doubted that fairness could win.